success, wealth, recognition. Gary Cooper had it all, lost it all, then turned a revolutionary discovery into the success paradox. Here's Gary.
My guest this week is Mark Tinsley, a trial lawyer who has dedicated his career to fighting for justice and accountability for his clients. He is based in Allendale, South Carolina, and he has handled some of the most complex and high-profile cases in the state, including the Mallory Beach case. This is where he represented the family of a 19-year-old girl who was killed in a boating accident involving Alex Murdaugh's son, Paul. Mark was nice enough to join us before he heads out with his old bud, country superstar Chris Stapleton, to go see the legendary George Strait in concert. Mark, welcome to the Success Paradox. It's great to see you, man.
Good to see you, Gary.
So we were talking earlier. When's the last time do you think we saw each other?
But I'm pretty sure it'll be my first year of law school, so that'd been 1995.
1995. I was in grad school. I was getting my master's in health administration.
Yep.
And you were in law school. And before that, it was Pirate Land Campground.
Yeah. I was thinking that just a few minutes ago because I started working cutting grass and then riding the garbage truck when I was either 12 or 13. I cut grass for a long time. And I remember we hung out a lot before that. So I was trying to think about how long it is I've known you. Been at least 40 years.
Gosh, you always won the bicycle races. And you could always catch more bass than us.
Yeah, good times. Long time ago. Different world.
It's amazing. I guess we reconnected when my son, I see on your wall back there, that's a fallow deer behind you.
That's an axis.
Axis, yeah. My son's got an axis as well. He got into big game hunting, and I started posting some of his pictures, and you and I started having some dialogue about that. That was probably 2005-ish.
Probably.
Something like that. And we started talking about deer hunting and all the stuff us low country boys like to do.
Yeah.
When did you move to the low country?
2000.
2000?
Yeah. I'd been in Columbia for a couple of years working after law school, and I was contemplating going back home. And then Ness Motley was a big firm then that just settled some of the tobacco litigation and talked about going to work with them. And they were going to have me on the road doing railroad asbestos work. Really didn't appeal to me. And I'd been to Allendale, and there's not much here.
No.
It makes Andrews seem like a big place.
Andrews is my hometown, town of like 1,200 people. And that's one of the things that, it's amazing to me. You're going somewhere today that's really, really cool.
Yeah.
And you would think you're from Anderson originally, right?
That's right.
And you moved to the big city of Allendale.
Big city of Allendale. It's not a good place to come if you want to go out to eat or go shopping at the mall. But
And my daddy would always say Andrews is a great place to be from. And you get out of there. But we love Andrews because it's just good people.
Same here. You know everybody, and there's a nice quality of life when you know everybody and people know you and want to help you, and you want to help them. And you go to some place like Nashville, where I'm going today, and you may run into somebody but the odds are you don't see anybody. A lot of people from California and New York, all over the place.
When I asked you to do this podcast, everybody wants you to do the podcast, I'm sure. Netflix is at your house, for goodness sakes.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to talk about the case, and sure, that would be cool if we talk about that. But what I find amazing, I've been very fortunate in my life. We grew up in the same campground, and everybody there was pretty much blue-collar workers, and they certainly weren't wealthy.
Right.
And here, you and I find ourselves in a very privileged situation. Not many people would have moved to Allendale and then find themselves 20-something years later on a worldwide stage. You wouldn't have thought that. Well, and you're going today.
Little known fact, Allendale is the center of the world. People just don't realize it.
I love that. You're going today to hang out with a guy who I think's amazing, because for 20 years, he was playing music and nobody gave a damn.
Yeah.
And I think it's people like you and him that do what they do, and they do it because they love it, and they become really good at it. And then all of a sudden, people recognize them, and they're like, holy crap, that guy's really good at his craft. To me, that's what this podcast is about. Sure, you're the Murdoch attorney. Sure, you're Mark the Tiger Tinsley. But I want to know, how'd you get to be that guy? Where did the grind start?
I think I'm just stubborn, Gary. I'm just stubborn and determined. And I remember being in high school and somebody came and they're talking about careers, what you're going to do in the future. I didn't know any lawyers. And at that time, environmental law was going to be something in the future. Maybe it is. And so I said, well, that sounds great. So that's what I decided I was going to do in the 8th, 9th, 10th grade. I'm not real sure when it was, but somewhere around there. And I didn't have a clue what it was, but I just sort of stuck with it. When I went to Clemson, I ended up majoring in forestry because I had declared major the first day. I didn't know what to do.
Every 18-year-old knows what they want to be when they grow up, right?
You don't, and you don't really have anybody that tells you this is what you ought to do. And if they do tell you that, you don't listen to them, right?
Right. Right.
Because you're a lot smarter than everybody else.
That's for your mom and dad. You're not going to listen to that.
The older I get, the more I realize I didn't know near as much as I thought I did. But that's it. Being here, doing what I've done for years. I mean, I handle cases all over the state. I've handled cases outside of the state, but I've been fortunate and I've got lots of good clients and lots of work. Now in a small town, you do a lot of things to help people out, but I handle cases all over. And so
I remember you as a fighter when we were kids, and something must have happened in y'all's home when you were kids, because I was at the Strategic Growth Forum in Palm Springs, California, and I look over to my left and there's Christy Tinsley, and she's the wealth manager in Nashville for Ernst & Young, one of the greatest firms in the country.
Yeah.
So here you are, highly successful in your field of study, and there's Christy doing the same thing, and we all grew up in the same campground.
I think the common denominator is we like-minded people probably attract one another. And so, even at that age, Christy's done well. I don't really know what Christy does. It's hard for me to follow what Christy does. She's the partner there, and she's been there about 20 years, which is how I met my wife, through Christy.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, the fighting thing is what makes me think of you, and the hunting thing makes me think of you, and never giving up makes me think of you. And so you moved to Allendale, you just hang up a shingle?
No. I went in working with my partner now, Woody Gooding, and so we've had a firm there together. I've been a partner there for, I'm really not sure how long. Went to work with him and liked it and enjoyed it. I just don't quit. I mean, that's the problem. That's the problem with me. I mean, even if I didn't like it or didn't enjoy it, I probably wouldn't quit anyway. So I just keep going. But I do. I really do. And there's a lot of satisfaction in it. I was fortunate when I was in Columbia. I was working for a big defense firm doing insurance defense. We were mainly doing these class actions in synthetic stucco. Then you had all these condos at the coast that were rotten. But he was very candid in terms of what that life looked like. And, you had some third party auditor said, you really didn't need to do this. And so if you won the case, of course you should have won it because it was a loser. And if you lost the case, well, you screwed it up. It's sort of a thankless position to be in if you're going to be a litigator and do the kinds of things that I do. It's a lot more satisfying to help somebody through something like, in this case, with the Beaches, the worst, darkest time of their life, and try to help them through that, help them get some semblance of closure and get some justice if there is such a thing.
I was talking to one of your partners at that law firm in Columbia when you were training. I'm not going to mention his name. And this was a prelude to what ended up becoming the Murdoch case. Y'all were working for that big firm as a defense firm. He says, by the way, that you went to the dark side because he stayed on
They gave us white hats. When I switched side, we had white hats. They wear the black hat. So.
He stayed on the defense side, and he said you went to the dark side.
Yeah.
But he said y'all were working together, you and him. And again, I'm leaving him nameless. I'm guessing you remember this. He said y'all had a case against Alec. He was the lead guy, and you were younger than him. He's older than me and you. Y'all beat Alec. And Alec came up to him and said, "You better watch your back." And this guy said, "Wait, are you, he was flabbergasted. He was like, "Are you threatening me?" And he said, "I'm just telling you, you better watch your back." He wanted to come back at Alec, and then he was like, "This is insanity." Do you remember that?
No.
Yeah, he said it was years and years ago. And he said that was just one of the most insane things that he had ever dealt with.
Yeah. Somebody said the other day that they thought that the best compliment was Alec in one of the jailhouse calls saying that I was volatile. I just don't like a bunch of BS, right? There's things that matter and there's things that don't matter. And if you waste time in something that doesn't matter, that's not pragmatic, practical, or, whatever the case may be, it doesn't make sense to me. Why don't we just get to whatever the heart of the matter is and deal with it? Because we got to deal with it. It is what it is, and we need to deal with it. And so, but I don't like bullies. I don't like people who think that their station somehow entitles them to something, especially at the expense of others. And so I think that's what he meant. If he got in my face or somebody else did, I don't usually back down. And you get what you give with me, usually.
I was just sitting in my bed last night thinking, Mark, I just have to keep in mind as I think of and talk about this, people died.
Yeah.
When I do laugh about certain parts of this case, I have to remember 2 children died. And one of my really good friends is Bart Proctor. His sister-in-law died. And so there are certain parts of this case that are funny when he's talking about Bubba and the chicken and all that stuff. But it's a sobering reality. Anybody that hears me and you talk, I'm not making fun of anything about that. And I need to be sincere about that. But then there's also some amazing things that need to be highlighted. There was some heroism during this case.
Gary, I think that what we do is we compartmentalize things. I think that you're exactly right. There are parts of the story that are funny. There are parts of the story that are sort of shocking. And I'm not talking about the murders and the deaths. It's just the craziness of it. And if, if somebody told you this story 5 years ago, no, that's too unbelievable. I'm writing this book and this is what it's going to say. You wouldn't believe that. I knew Paul. I knew Maggie. I never met Marion, Maggie's sister, or her husband. I can't imagine what it was like to have to walk the tightrope that they have to walk in terms of you've still got a nephew who may or may not support it or believe that his father did it. And you got parents who you're sensitive to. And from where I sat, I could see things that a lot of people probably couldn't see. For lots of reasons, not the least of which is I sort of had all the information. And once the watershed moment of all the financial crimes begins to come out and you can see the whole picture, well, then all of a sudden it makes sense what's happened and what he's done.
Right.
And, the husband's always a suspect. The first person that finds them is always a suspect. The story didn't make a whole lot of sense. The behavior after from Alec didn't make sense, wasn't consistent. I'm going to clear Paul's name. I'm not going to find Paul's murderer. I'm going to clear Paul's name in the boat crash. And so there were lots of things. But for me personally, every time I ever met Maggie, she was extraordinarily nice to me. Every time I was around Paul was yes, sir, no, sir. And I'm not saying that Paul didn't do all the things that are attributed to Paul.
Right.
But he was a lot like his father in that respect, in terms of he knew his audience was. And so if he was around adults, he was well-mannered and helpful and a nice kid. He'd come off as a nice kid. They didn't deserve whatever they may have done in their lives. They didn't deserve what happened.
Right.
And the things that Alec did, even before the murders, I mean, the things that came out, it really sort of brought a stain on the legal profession, for sure. Called a lot of things into question. And maybe people don't really want to talk about it or recognize it, but the legal profession ended up taking care of Alec.
Made me wonder, and I've never asked you this, but this is the question that's been burning in the back of my mind. Did Mark Tinsley take the boat case to put an end of the insanity that had been going on down there in the Low Country? Or was that part of your motive?
I think I heard one of the defense lawyers from the dark side say it the best. I mean, we knew Alec was Robin Hood. We didn't know that he was Al Capone. And I don't think that, and maybe it's back to this idea that we compartmentalize things. We see what we want to see at times and we ignore the other parts because, you know, in our compartmentalization of it, he's a good person. He's doing the right thing. He's fighting the good fight. He fooled a lot of people for a long time. And, you know, when I took it, honestly thought that it was something that I needed to do because nobody else was going to do it. Nobody else could do it. But in the beginning,
were people scared to take the case?
Yes, it's a different world today than it was 4.5 years ago, for sure. But I remember telling somebody, look, I mean, these people aren't dummies. Alec, the people that were around him, his law partners, some of the best lawyers in the state, maybe even in the country. I mean, there's some really good lawyers there. These people aren't dummies. And this thing was radioactive from the word go. If Alec hadn't been so resistant to the fact that Paul was going to go to jail for some period of time, we wouldn't be sitting here right now. And I think that the lesson in this, you need to deal with it honestly. And
acceptance is really hard, accepting where you are and dealing with it rather than, it's like they said Nixon probably wouldn't have been impeached if he would have just owned up to it. But the cover up is always where you get in trouble.
For sure. And you know, I mean, the reality is that the world is a whole lot smaller today than it was 4 years ago. You know, I remember when this thing started, I didn't know what TikTok was or Reddit or anything else. And now the minute something happens, millions of people have already talking about it, dissecting it, checking into it, researching, you know, and so you can't do today what Alec thought he could do. You couldn't do it and couldn't get away with it.
I know some folks that moved from down there from 50 years ago, and it's all stories. I'm not going to repeat any of that. But getting down to where you started 4 years ago, I was reading about some of the Holocaust and some of the atrocities that happened in the world. And they said evil may be action, but real evil is inaction.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense to me because in Germany, there was a lot of blind eyes turned to the atrocities that were going on.
Well, it was, you know, there's a lot of willful blindness in this too, I think, in the making of Alec and this monster that was on his back that, you know, he's a broken person. Clearly he's a broken person. I don't care how bad it is for Gary Cooper. I don't think Gary Cooper would think, okay, I know what the answer is. The way out of this is to kill my wife and son. It wouldn't be. He's a broken person. When he broke, how he broke, has he always been broken? I don't know. But that monster that made him think this was the answer, there was a lot of willful blindness and the creation of all of those things that were going on in the back.
Yeah, a lot of enabling, a lot of turning blind eyes, a lot of help from, I mean, we all watched the case, or I imagine a lot of people there are going to be listening to this. They watched the case and saw it where they had a lot of control and power. And so when I thought about you and the fighter and all that stuff, it made me wonder, was part of the motivation of, yeah, you got clients. Yeah, there was things going on, but made me wonder, is enough enough? Is that part of the motivation of taking the case?
it's been a real evolution in the handling. It's been an evolution because you go in thinking one thing, right? Initially, the question is, because I have cases at that point in time with other members of the firm. I have friendships with other members of the firm. I'm not friends with Alec. It's just we're not social friends. We don't hang out together. We would be friendly if we saw each other, and we were. So do my relationships, whether they be personal or business, do they affect my ability to take this case and help the Beach family? And no, I mean, I think I was uniquely situated to help them probably better than anybody else, because there's you had to know a lot. You had to know the playbook. You had to know who he was using. You had to know the relationships between Alec and different members of law enforcement. I mean, there was a lot of background information you had to know to be able to navigate through all the things you had to navigate. I didn't appreciate that at the beginning, but the biggest thing I didn't appreciate was the sort of specter that, because I have those relationships, because I'm 17 miles away in the adjoining county, there are not a lot of lawyers in the 14th Circuit, and the state's divided up into circuits. And the 14th Circuit is the Low Country, where Alec's father and grandfather and great-grandfather was a solicitor for 100 years. One of the things that I didn't appreciate was that there was so much scrutiny on the result. And I'm not built that way. I'm not designed that way. I don't back down anyway. I took the case. I had a responsibility to get the best result. And the result is, if somebody said $18 million for your daughter is a lot of money, that's only because it's not your daughter. The Beach family wouldn't trade places with themselves for $118 million. There's no amount of money. What they wanted was accountability. They wanted some objective accountability. And so we did what we could do. We took everything that Alec had, everything, all of his property. We took it, we sold it. We're going to take it. It's going to be sold. The rest of it's going to be distributed among his victims by the court. We got a level of accountability with Parker's who sold the alcohol. We sued everybody involved that, to your point, either you go along with it and you're a part of the problem, or you stand up to it. And, underage drinking is a terrible problem in this country. 11% of all alcohol is consumed by underage drinkers. How could that be? There's 2 deaths a week in South Carolina related to underage drinking. SLED doesn't check for fake IDs. SLED doesn't check for borrowed IDs in terms of the sales of alcohol. There's no check. There's no system in place where they're looking for. Now, if they see it, they'll do it. But kids aren't buying alcohol with no ID generally. They're using a borrowed ID, somebody that kind of looks like them, or they're going online and they're getting one online that's fake. You're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes complacency is just as bad as the primary actor. And in the beginning, I thought one thing. I thought that my ability to navigate and help these people would go one way. It didn't. I didn't know the reason why. But by the time we get to the start of the murder trial, yeah, enough's enough. Enough's enough. And, and Alec's family, they helped a lot of people. They had a lot of supporters. In a small town, those relationships, because we all compartmentalize how we feel and what we think about somebody, those relationships are strong. And so, I didn't really care at the end if there was going to be a personal cost to me. It was imperative. The first time I saw Buster in the courthouse, I told him, I said, I'm here for your mama and for Paul. And I was. It's a terrible thing to be associated with a lunatic's reasoning and killing 2 innocent people. By then, enough was enough. And I sort of no holds barred, and I'm going to let it all out. And I tried, there were things I was telling the Attorney General's office. You need to say this. There's no life insurance. He's telling a lie. It's all bullshit. There's no life insurance. And the significance of that was for people who really knew Alec, who still couldn't believe that he could have killed Paul. In any given day, I guess a spouse could kill another spouse, right? But to kill your child is something totally different. But the minute that you realize that the loop's closing in on him in September of 21, and he stages that attempted suicide. And then once he gets caught, they're lying about there's a shooter. They've already got Eddie Smith in custody. They continue to lie about it. My recollection is Friday, even into Saturday, they're releasing statements before they realize that SLED has Eddie Smith, who was there when Alec staged this thing. And so once he gets caught, it becomes, well, I was trying to commit suicide to get Buster life insurance, because the truth is I was trying to do it to say, because SLED was after me and SLED had confronted me, and see, somebody's really after me and my family. There's this vigilante on the loose. I couldn't have killed him. That's what it was. And the fact that there was no life insurance really swayed people that I talked to, the people who knew him, the people who still believed, because they compartmentalized who they thought Alec was, and it affected what they were able to see. But the minute they learned that, it swayed a lot of people. And I think the Attorney General's office just thought it was inconsistent because they had charged him to get his passport with conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. And if there's no insurance, well, now we've made this inconsistent charge. I don't know. We went round and round. I don't think it's inconsistent. I mean, if you go to a bar and try to hire somebody to kill your spouse and it's a FBI agent and they arrest you for conspiracy to commit murder, the FBI agent was never going to commit the murder. I mean, the fact that he admitted to conspiring to do this crime, that is the crime, not the fact that he would not have gotten any life insurance, because there wasn't any.
All of that being said, the fact that I know what it's like to be from a small town. I know what it's like to live in a small town. I've never not lived in one. And you had the courage. They're calling you a tiger. I don't know whether you're a tiger or a lion. I know you're a badass, but this is leading up to something. You said you didn't care about the cost, and there's been many times in my life where I didn't either. The book that I wrote, Success Paradox, I ended up having 3 hip replacements, back surgery, almost drank myself to death, almost lost my wife and kids. And given myself in your position, my kids would have said, go after what's right, Daddy. And we don't care the cost either. But this has taken a toll on you. And you also had some health issues. I don't have to get in any details or anything, but how's Mark and family and stuff now?
I think Mark's doing pretty good.
Good.
Close to 8 years ago now, I started trying to be more healthy, and I was going to one of these concierge doctors who would look at your blood work and tell you, oh, you need to take this vitamin or that vitamin, and doing different things. And part of that was keeping up with your PSA. And so when I started, I was 44 and my PSA, I believe, was 3.5. And so what they would tell you, and you may know this, is 1 to 4 is normal. We're watching it. 1 to 4 is normal. You're in the normal range. It's high, but 1 to 4 is normal. And so we watched it. And then in 2019, it jumps up to 5.7, and it can fluctuate, right? Your PSA, depending on different things, it could fluctuate. And so in the beginning of this, I realized that there's something going on. And so, we're going to recheck it again in 6 weeks, and we'll go do this 4K blood test, and we'll do this fancy MRI.
Now, just to be clear, this is during all of this stuff.
Yeah. The boat crash happened in 2019 and we filed suit. So and then, then you have COVID but yeah, I mean, all this is during this time. And so in November of 20, I had some blood work. I was recently divorced. I found out I had prostate cancer, and I didn't just have prostate cancer. I had stage 4 prostate cancer.
See,
so many times in life, you get a bad hand, and you need to deal with it, and you need to be cognizant of that bad things can happen. And the wolf is maybe always at the door, whether that's cancer or something else. And you try to stay focused on the things that matter. When you have something like what you're talking about, when you go through these kinds of things, it really puts what's important and what matters in perspective. Mm-hmm. And if you're genuine, if you're authentic, and you try to do the right thing because the right thing matters, I think people recognize that and they see it. And whether they see it or not, whether somebody appreciates me because of it, I don't really care, because I'm the only person I actually have to sleep with at the end of the day. And so that's the way I try to live my life. And that's the way that I try to do in every regard.
One of the main parts of the book, and one of the things I struggled with, maybe I'm not as confident as you, or haven't been in my parts of my life, is being authentic. One of the things that I've learned and somebody provided me was what other people think of me is none of my business. Because there's been parts of my life where I was always struggling with what other people thought of me. And I would worry about that too much. And what I think I've learned from this case and what with you and your life is you just, hey, I'm going to move to Allendale. Wait, what? You're going to move from the capital city to a small town. And how's that going to work out for you? Well, it's turned out pretty damn good.
Yeah.
I'm going to take this case because I think it's right. Well, next thing you know, Netflix is at your house.
Yeah.
So I'm in awe of you and your career. I'm not just kissing your ass. I think it's cool.
I'm not taking it that way. I appreciate that. And you know, I mean, we've known each other a long time, and I don't think you got any reason not to be your true, authentic self, because I think you're a heck of a good person. And I like you, and I think the world of you, which is why I'm doing this. But I appreciate it. I really do. And I don't know that, you know, as you get older, you just sort of put things in perspective. And the things that I do, I see the worst things that can happen, the worst things that you can go through. And that puts things in perspective. It might suck the fun out of life at times, but you just try to do the best you can with the information you have and make the right decision, hope for the best.
One of my favorite things that this guy told me, I went to him. I was at the bottom of the barrel. This was over 6 years ago. And I was telling him, oh, if you had my life, and if you had this, and if you had my business problems, and if you had this. And he said, I've listened to 2 hours of that shit. Do you have a roof over your head? Have you eaten today? Do you have a car? And I said, yeah. And he said, you're an asshole. And he said, you have more than 90% of the people in the world. Go home and think about that for 24 hours and come back tomorrow.
Yeah.
And man, that really keeps it in perspective. And when you see the stuff that you've seen, and when you hit a PSA of 4+, and when you deal with, you know, cancer and all this stuff, you realize, you know what? I've eaten today.
Yeah.
I got a roof over my head. I got children. If you have children, I got children who love me. And it puts everything else in perspective. And you've handled this rise to stardom really good. And I'm going to let you go because you have a great date with Chris Stapleton. Thank you so much for joining me today, man.
My pleasure, Gary. Good talking with you.
Great talking to you too. And that wraps up another episode of the Success Paradox. If you like the show, please take a moment to subscribe so you'll get notified when I release new episodes. Also, if you have a moment, I'd love it if you left us a review so that other incredible folks like yourself can learn about the show. I'll see you next time.
To learn and practice the Success Paradox lifestyle, visit GaryCCooper.com. The Success Paradox is a production of Forbes Books.